So, thanks for that, John. You're going to say some more and maybe take some questions on it?
Yeah, we'll sit down, probably myself. Where's Duncan? Duncan is there, yeah. And Elaine and Francis. Is that right? Yeah, we'll go up there.
John, thanks very much. Thanks, Duncan. Great, that's great. You can put it. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody, and it's really great to see such an audience here of people that are experts in this area, are certainly very committed to the topic that we're going to be talking about, which is going to be about biodiversity and climate change and how we engage local communities in this. You know, what are the things we can do to do what, in fact, John has done in that wonderful film, you know? I think that's an example of what really can make a difference in communities. And river catchments, for example, are an ideal area to look at, because everybody likes their rivers. And of course, river catchments can be very long, from headwaters to the sea. Many communities can engage along the way, and I think a lot of things can happen that can bring people together. And it's a great opportunity for people like us here that are trying to get the messages out and to engage with people. So it's a great panel we've got here in front of us, and you know, just to kind of, we've got here, Francis, how do we engage people, you know, in a time when our society and all over the world, the problems of online media and misinformation and, if you like, sensational, you know, extremism is becoming more the norm. You know, what are the things we can do at the local level in communities to engage our local citizens in these issues? And I think we've got a great panel of people that come from real practical experience on this. So maybe we talk with you, Francis, first. Maybe you could tell us how you feel is a good way to engage local people.
Well, we've been thinking about this in Dollar Action for a number of years. We all live, those of us who are heavily involved in, it started off with the cleanups of the river. We kind of live on certain parts of the Dollar, so we were monitoring that. And then we were trying to figure out, well, how do we get people who are in both the upper reaches and the lower reaches involved as well? And our main method of communication was through our membership. And then we started using Facebook as well and Instagram. But I'm afraid that we don't really know how to use TikTok, which I think would reach a wider audience.
I don't.
Because if we want to get younger members in, I mean, the average age of the committee is around 60. And we really need involvement from younger people. So we were kind of figuring out, well, what could we do to make Dollar Action more appealing in one way, and also to educate the children. So that's where the idea for the film came about. And by having the film now, we're putting a package together to bring in, first of all, to the primary schools that are on the catchment of the Dodder, and trying to get those kids interested in what biodiversity is about, what they can do to help it, talking about developing a wildlife corridor the whole length of the Dodder, you know, for the various different animals and birds that live along that catchment, that they have a safe passage, and how important that is, and keeping the river clean. And okay, they can start off by litter picking, but if you get them down to the edge of the river, you can involve them in a lot more things. I do a lot of work on water testing, and we can do very simple things that small kids, primary kids, would be really interested in, the kick testing. And then gradually bring it up to the level of secondary schools. But once we got the film made, suddenly community groups started to want to view it and figure out themselves, and just in local areas, and this is really helpful to us now, and we think things will develop from here. By them seeing the film, they'll then go out in their own community and maybe start off with cleanups and maybe come in and do the water testing as well. So
Absolutely.
it's expanding out bit by bit.
Absolutely. Well, I think what you're doing is wonderful, and your approach is completely right. And John, on that, you know, in terms of the reality of bringing that message into local communities, you know, what do you think is the best mechanism for doing that, besides doing something like this that inspires people, and which is wonderful? And I think, you know, this could be done in every river in Ireland. You know, I think I'd love to see every river covered this way, and all the communities along those rivers to be engaged and to show that they take responsibility and respect their rivers and the biodiversity of it, you know.
Well, it seems to me that we have a twin crisis here, you know, and it was touched on by Brian this morning when he talked about how the old models are dead in terms of broadcasting, in the legacy media, as it's referred to. And then the other issue is the fact that, and Francis has just referred to this, is that younger people are disengaged. I mean, it's terribly disappointing, I have to just say it, and Duncan, maybe you'll know about this, but Fridays for Future was a movement aimed at young people, ostensibly, those big marches, Greta Thunberg, who is a hero of mine. But unfortunately, when you look outside Fridays for Future now, outside the Dáil, it's composed of some very sad-looking 60-something-year-olds. You know, that's what's happening. And I'm trying to rack my brain as to what's going on. When you've mentioned TikTok, can we hit more people with TikTok? Maybe. But, you know, Brian has said, and this is the beauty of membership of DCTV, is that we abide by certain rules. Now, we are streaming, you know, and we're trying to reach more people. But the eye-opener for me was that we started off this film as a sort of an experiment. But what was really refreshing and exciting was the fact that when we began to show it in the community halls, we were getting, like, we were out in Tala, the cinema was standing room only. We went to Ringsend, again standing room only, and then we went to Knocklion, and then we went the same thing. And it's a very different experience, and that's a real community experience, when you were showing a film in a hall and then getting a conversation going afterwards, right? And that seems to me is that if we want to bypass that sort of, if you want, the mainstream media and the TikTok media and all of that, this seems to be a good way of doing it, right? Because, and there's no escaping our digital age, because what we found very interesting was the power of the WhatsApp group.
Yes.
The WhatsApp group, where you just say, oh, the film is on tonight and it's showing there, and suddenly you have this 100 people showing up, you know? That's very powerful, and that's, to me, that was the big revelation, right? That suddenly there is this space here, and what was lovely for me actually coming in this morning, because I went back and I studied digital filmmaking afterwards. I did an MSc, and Alan Fitzpatrick, who was my head of the course there, that, you know, we were just talking about it beforehand. Alan is in the audience there, how things have changed, how we're seeing a breakdown in terms of legacy media, and frankly I don't know where it's going to go over the next number of years. But what I do know is that this is an opportunity, that we have this opportunity now to engage with communities, and that's what DCTV is all about, you know.
Thanks, John. And Elaine, from your perspective, who's engaged in producing content and film in this area of climate change and biodiversity, can you tell me from your kind of experience, how do you feel this can move forward? Because I think this discussion is on a track, but, you know, where would you see it coming from?
I connect them up in this way. When you're in a beautiful place, when you're in a community, when you're by the river, and I'm from West Clare in the west of Ireland, those spaces, those beauty spots, are our collective dreaming spaces. There are spaces that we can dream in, that we nourish our souls and our ideas and ambitions. You know, writers will classically say, I went for a walk and I felt a lot clearer afterwards. We all kind of think that. And if you walk along the Dodder, or for me in West Clare along the Atlantic or whatever, you just, it's a huge human quality of being able to dream. And obviously if there's pollution, or there's, you know, the backdrop going on in our heads of a war across the world, 2 of them, and all that stuff, you feel overwhelmed. But when you have a chance to dream and to be in nature, it's healing, and it's, you know, so these are collective dreaming spaces. That's what I see biodiversity as. And anything that's a monoculture, like a lot of farming in this country, that is not good for our souls. On TV and film, then, I work in the area of scripted TV and film, which means, you know, dramatized series, and something like Grey's Anatomy, something like any film in the cinema, anything where it's characters. And when we're watching TV and film, and this is not documentaries or docu-series, but those are collective dreaming spaces too. And we're all watching something and we're dreaming, we're thinking about the story, and we're carried along. So that's, to me, when I work as a script editor my whole life, I love writers and I love the west of Ireland, and both need to be sustained. Then I think that we can dramatize solutions to the climate crisis and to biodiversity and sustainability, and like environment and nature. It's all connected, along with human rights, because we are entitled to biodiversity. We're entitled to our future. It's the thing that we're most entitled to, and we need to show that sense of entitlement. But there is a problem, and John was saying this, it's very difficult to get people to understand how important biodiversity is, and the environment and nature, those collective dreaming spaces, because there's an issue with climate literacy, and something that documentary and reportage find very hard to get across. I was at the Journalist Freelance Forum last week, and Caroline O'Doherty, she's the writer for The Independent, was saying every time she writes an article about the environment, she has to explain over and over again. People they find it so overwhelming and difficult. So this is where scripted film and TV come in, where we can, through characters who are trying to figure it out themselves, who are messy, who are, and it can be comedic. It doesn't have to drive the whole thing, the whole story. But my thing is to get it into episodes. So I can give examples of that. One of my favorite shows is Grey's Anatomy, and they spent a whole episode on what would happen if the air conditioning broke down in the hospital. And it just would be chaos. They couldn't do operations. They couldn't, you know, and that's a very real possible problem, you know, as those air conditioning systems just cannot cope with the volume. And cooling is just going to be a bigger issue in terms of our future survival. So, and then there's a film I'm working on, a script at the moment. I freelance for Screen Ireland, and whenever a writer and I work together, I'm trying to get climate in to the script. So, for instance, but I'm trying to do it in not morally or preachy ways or anything like that. There's this scene that I'm working on where a group of graduates are graduating college, and the dean is talking about their future, and they're doing shots in the background because they're students and they're celebrating. But I have the dean gradually say, oh, your future, and you look forward to this, and you go forth in life, and you know, it's up to your destiny. And then he says, and then there's climate change, and then he starts going off on one about climate change, and oh no, this is terrible, this is really bad. But it's a way of kind of showing, actually, you know, you can get these things into, you can get these moments into script, and it's a comedy, so the dean gradually gets more and more emotional about it, and then really what are we sending people out into, you know? And so it's just, what I do is ways of trying to dramatize people's very real misunderstandings, lack of connection, where do I come in all the messy human ways that there are on screen, because climate literacy is an issue. And so the only way to kind of, I feel, to kind of really help people who aren't able to understand it from reportage or from discussion is to invade those collective dreaming spaces when you're watching a film or TV, and learn, oh, that person has cycled instead of driven a car, that person has recycled, that person has gone out and campaigned and gotten proactive. That, you know,
Yeah.
and I identify with
And
that.
do you find that you can bring young people on board?
Yes, much more
in
so.
other words, into real
Yeah.
actions. So
Yeah.
is
much
that
more so.
happening? Do you
Much
find
more.
that there is outcomes that are getting to those that really, especially our young generation, because their future is at stake now so
Yeah.
seriously with climate change
Yeah.
and biodiversity loss. If I go back just in my life, we'll look
Yeah.
up there in Glenismore where I was reared, you know, in that time since I was 20, if you
Yeah.
like, and I was very conscious of environment then, we've lost 68% of our wildlife.
Maybe, yeah,
We've
yes,
lost
Chris
over
Packham
80%
says that
of our
too, yeah.
insects
Yeah.
in terms of population numbers, globally and in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the pressures are still there. But,
Yeah.
but we're not seeing it in real actions happening at community level. And probably too, I suppose, Francis, when it comes to election, when you think of those communities along the Dodder, you know, those people, you know, when it comes to politicians now, whatever party, doesn't matter, out there campaigning, where will they put biodiversity? And issues like the water quality of the Dodder and climate change and all these issues, where do you think they're going to treat this?
They will all pay lip service to, you know, helping with climate change, but I think there's a problem, and I agree very much with what Elaine is saying there, in terms of kind of getting a connection with the actual wording. Biodiversity, what does it mean? It covers an awful lot, but what exactly is it? And you mentioned climate change, and climate change, it's like just, you know, people zone out, not again, not again. So to get politicians to engage in a meaningful way, I don't know how that's going to happen, but I think it needs to be mentioned on the doorsteps by people, and, you know, interrogate them as to what they actually are planning as a party.
Yeah, and John,
To
would you think,
mitigate.
or would you feel, yes, I totally agree, Francis, on what you said, but do you think that when householders, you know, are if you like, confronted with politicians when they come to their door, maybe that's the wrong word, but when a politician does visit you know, people's homes, do you think householders are bringing these sort of issues to them?
Well, no, I mean, I as you know, I was a public representative for 20 years at various levels, and one of my most favorite pursuits was actually canvassing. Believe it or not, I loved canvassing, talking to people. But I can tell you that in all that time, I would say climate change was raised with me maybe 9 times, 10 times.
Right.
That's the truth. I'm just
and
being
yet
honest.
they'd have known you were coming from
Yeah,
that,
they would
that
have known, but
viewpoint.
they would bring up litter, dog dirt, recycling, cracks on the road, police, you know, but climate change, it's very odd because you would just get someone who was, the odd time, someone who was passionate about it and interested and knew the stuff, but they were the only ones that would bring it up. And it's still the same. And in fact, what happens is, be it biodiversity, as you know, as we speak, we have a summit in Colombia. It's very, very important. You mentioned insects. Like when I was a kid, you know, a lot of you will know this. That if you drove in your car afterwards, the windscreen was just full of insects. Afterwards, you can drive the length of Ireland now. You won't see a single insect. That's just the nature of it. No, and you said it, Francis. No insects.
Yeah, yeah.
No bats,
Yeah.
nothing.
No.
It all depends on these things. I mean, it's this astounding statistic that, you know, if you take all the take all the mammals, take the mammals and the humans and weigh them and weigh all the insects. The insects weigh a lot more, you know. That's it. You wouldn't know it, but that's it. That's how important insects are. I think, just going back to the human interest in this, and what human beings are, if they're engaged, it comes and goes. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we had these huge demonstrations. We had people talking about climate change. We had David Attenborough on, making a passionate plea. It's gone. It's gone down. Now it'll come back, but at the moment, it's not a priority. And unfortunately, Duncan, you'll know this, that a lot of politics are determined by focus groups and by, this idea of making policy, which way is the wind blowing. The wind is not blowing in, towards biodiversity or climate change right now, and so therefore it becomes less of a priority. That's just the simple fact.
And if you take community television, the role of what Dublin is doing and Cork are doing,
Yeah.
and others that are doing it also, but they may not be registered, but there are other groups around the country. How important is this in getting the message out to the local communities? Is that a platform? First of all, it can be trusted because it is regulated and it does comply with the ethics codes for media. And in other words,
I think I would be more focused on international, on TV and film internationally. However, years ago I did work on a drama series which was on DCTV, and it tackled very well, again through dramatising the issue of digital literacy and illiteracy among adults by showing, well, if you can learn how to use a computer, it made people feel less ashamed of being, of having literacy issues. So I do think you need to tackle this on all fronts, definitely community, definitely nationally, and also internationally. So I'm working on film and TV projects that can be seen anywhere. And the thing about content now is it can be seen anywhere at any time. It will never not be available. So when you are talking, but again, when we're making TV and film, we're saying the more local this is, the better. The more connected and passionate the people are whose story is being featured, whose area it is, the better. That's why this film is lovely, because people are very passionate and they're proactive. Like, those are all the ingredients you want in warriors, in heroes, in stories.
And can that be brought down to the local communities? The quality that you're doing, which obviously must be very high because you're engaging actors and, all of that can be very expensive.
Well, they would take their inspiration from local communities and from people. And our stories come from people's own, passions and connections. So, for instance, I'm working on a script that somebody in County Wicklow has written about the conservation efforts there, and what the world and what Ireland would look like if the water breached the whole of Ireland and we were flooded. How would we survive? And it's that kind of showing people what could happen if they don't take action, but doing it in a very, really entertaining way. It becomes fun, and it becomes about, well, actually the places that Ireland did have conservation projects in are now in this drama the safe places. So that's kind of, and showing that the people who put the efforts in now, because this is set in the future, that the local people who put the efforts in, whether it's rewilding bogs or planting heather up in Wicklow Mountains, they're the heroes in the future. So that's how we kind of show people going, oh, I'd like to be a hero too, or oh wow, these people are doing amazing things. You have to dramatise it.
And how important is people working together collectively on this? In other words,
hugely.
Rather than just individuals doing something,
Everything has to be researched. So I would research everything that we talk about in a script, and it has to be heavily informed by either scientists or engineers or climatologists or whomever. In order for it to be well formed, it has to be informed. So I did a climate leadership course in Trinity, so I have access to all of those 160 other students alongside me, as well as the professors. So I can pick up the phone and say, they're talking about seaweed in this scene, I'm just wondering, is it the right time of year? Would this be what it would look like? Could they harvest it then? You know, just
Yeah.
to kind of get the exact information.
Yeah.
But I can ask community groups, and it's always, what's closer to the bone is more universal.
Yeah.
So-
But if you take, here we're in a third level institute, and I see a couple of young people in the room. I used to lecture in TU Dublin when it was DIT in Bolton Street, in the School of Architecture, but I'm only seeing a couple of students here are of that age group. Where are students, at this event, and by the way, this is a common thing I'm seeing
Yeah.
at climate change events in third level institutes. This is not a reflection on TU Dublin, it's just every third level institute where I give talks on climate change or on biodiversity or on, circular economy issues or whatever. Usually it's an older age group. I find that very few young people, we have one young person here. Any idea where all the students are today? Or would they have known about this event?
I think it's a reading week this week. It's a reading week this week.
Okay. Doing what?
Well, they're supposed to be studying, but
Okay. But in other words, this wouldn't be important enough for students concerning their future, etc.
well, it would be important. But
Well, you're here, so
well, I'm filming the thing.
okay, yeah. So are you saying that here we are in a third level institute and there's no student really here?
Is it just me?
Environmental studies
Yeah.
be compulsory?
Hmm?
Should environmental studies be compulsory in secondary?
Well, I mean, this is a question. Maybe we should open it up to this. In other words,
Yeah.
is there enough awareness?
Well,
Yeah.
Duncan, I mean,
Yeah, it's a good point.
I asked that question to some young people, so where are they? One person told me that, okay, it may be a reading week, but a lot of them are off on skiing holidays. Now, maybe that's an exaggeration, I don't know. But, I mean, the irony of ironies, because they have to, of course, in these skiing resorts now, they have to manufacture the snow because there's no snow anymore. They have to use fossil fuel to make the snow so that they go skiing. So, I don't know, it's...
I'm going to defend my students.
Okay.
So I'm a lecturer at TU Dublin. I teach in the Faculty of Business third year. We have business sustainability as an option. No one has to take it, and we have 180 students who.
Oh, bravo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, their engagement is really tremendous. I think something that is confusing for them, and this is outside, this particular context, but we have so many messages telling them at one stage that business as usual is fine. And nothing's really changing. All the adults in the room are talking about the airport cap, or they're talking about why can't we expand the roads, or this, that, and the other. While at the same time, they're also being taught at third level institutions like TU Dublin, who has an excellent sustainability education program, that we're also in an emergency, and I think that is hugely confusing for them, and that's just a thought to leave out there. But
Yeah, but
we do have great engagement.
No,
in
that
the
sounds
faculty
great,
of
but that's
business and
180 out of a campus of what, maybe 50,
I
20,000
think there's
students.
out of the people that could select that module, it's about out of 200.
Okay,
We
fine.
have about
Okay,
180
good.
who take
But
that.
should it be, the question is, should it be applied to everybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Because climate change is not optional. Environmental degradation is not.
Probably one day it won't be optional. But
It should be
if the
optional.
question is about where are the students and the question was kind of like, are they not showing an interest?
Kevin Horner
Well,
wants to
I'm
speak.
just saying from my
Man wants to
experience,
speak.
my students do show an interest, as like about 180 out of 200 take it as an optional module in business.
Yeah, can I ask, by the way, Kevin, just maybe to comment on what would you say on this topic?
Well, I suppose to go back to the first why students aren't here, it is really weak, and starting getting a lot of people have to work to pay rent. Like work to pay their costs coming to university, it is enormously expensive for them. Particularly international students, it costs about 35,000 a year when international students come to Dublin.
Yeah.
So just one while we're not here. In terms of should it be mandatory on programs, we're revamping every one of our programs at the moment in the school, and every single program at undergrad level and postgrad level has sustainability built into the core curriculum.
And is that going to happen?
That's what happens, yeah.
For every discipline, in every
In
faculty?
the school, we're doing it now, but it will be,
It's the policy of TU Dublin. So I'm working on the sustainability education team.
Right, so there is something, and when do you think that will happen?
Well, we're writing our modules right now for validation this year, and they should be live next September.
And will this cover the wide range from climate change to biodiversity loss to all the issues of air pollution, water pollution, you know?
The broadest possible interpretation of sustainability, so that
Okay.
can actually bring in what's relevant to the module. Some modules we find it much easier, some modules we find it very difficult for teaching applied grammar. It's a little bit more difficult to get sustainability there, but there are ways of doing it.
Yeah.
So we're taking a very, very broad church view of it. But every program has a number of top level program learning outcomes. And every module must then reflect those program learning outcomes
Right.
within the structure.
That sounds great.
It's
Now,
not
would that
by
be,
assessment or
would-
it might be by content.
will that also be marked as part of the curriculum? You know?
Once it's there as a module learning outcome, it has to be assessed.
Yeah.
Because the reason I say that is when you look through the Leaving Cert, physics, chemistry, biology, and even agricultural science, there's very little, there's in fact nothing about climate change in the Leaving Cert exam papers, which is where students will look for guidance in terms of what they should study. In other words, we have a generation of young people coming in that have really no knowledge about what's coming down the track for their future lives. And those young people go home to their families without that knowledge, and they can't share it with the families. So the problem is that we're not getting the changes in our society. But if those students now are going to get this module in first year, is it, or will it go through the different years?
Every program, every module in the school and media will have that embedded in it. So
Right
there'll
through
be a sustainability
all their
class.
4 or 5 years in the college, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds very interesting.
Woohoo! Brilliant.
Yeah, that sounds really, really good if that could be done.
Yeah.
Lovely. It's great to hear something positive, you know.
It's a little bit challenging.
And by the way, what you're doing with your 180 students too, these are important things. But if we think of all of our students in this country, you know, we need this to happen critically out there in every third level institute. And we also need the reform in our teacher education structures too, because our teachers are not learning about these things. And then of course teachers in second level education, they don't, if they don't have the subject that they've studied at third level with their master's degree, they don't feel competent to deliver it in the class. So we have real problems out there in our education system. Anyway, that's great news, and I'm sorry for going off on a tangent. Yeah?
Yeah, just
Stephen?
an observation. I think John touched on it, it's been mentioned here, and it's great to hear that the advances here with TU and to embed it across. But I think actually Fridays for Future, in my view, has actually caused a problem. And the problem was that there was a huge motivation, not just in Ireland but across the world, and young people got involved. And those young people are now the people who are at third level. The problem was that COVID stopped it. It was an action, it was on the ground, it was working. And the pressures were seen, the results of it in elections across Europe in particular were seen, and the changes were found. I mean, you could see the change in the European Parliament, you could see the new Green Deal, you could see the progress being made. But once COVID stopped those children and those students being on the ground and visible, it went away because their parents were engaged, their teachers were engaged, the force was coming from the people, the young people who could see what was coming, but they became dispirited too because the whole thing has stopped.
What
And
stopped
that-
it, do you think?
Well, COVID certainly
Yeah,
was one of
but
the
remember, you would have
aspects.
thought COVID though would have brought people into a situation where they'd be reflecting more about environmental issues.
Agreed.
Not when you were, not when you were cocooned, no. You just want, I can't remember half of what was done during COVID. And neither can a lot of my friends and neighbours of all different ages. Their minds were just like, oh, I'm saying thank God for Netflix. You know, and books that saved my sanity. We were swapping books with each other, but what else, I think third level is too late. You need to get it from the nursery up. Writing,
Sure.
waiting for the politician to appear in your doorstep, too bloody late. You write to them, and you keep writing them, and you keep emailing them, and you keep telling them, I'll give you 10 working days in which to reply. This
Yeah.
is the only way to keep nagging because the politicians
But are there
don't
enough
know
people
about
like
it.
you out there
So how are
to
they going to,
to make them care, you know?
yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
Because if they see
Yeah.
enough people coming in who are
Yeah.
not going to vote for them,
Okay,
it's the
two
only
more,
way they'll take action.
two more over here.
And one
Yeah.
over there.
Involved a lot of young people through comedy, and believe it or not, a lot of comedians are in great despair. My experience of young people is they are very aware, more than a lot of older what's going on in the climate. And their despair is because climate control and change, responses to it are not happening. I mean, why do we have oil magnates like running, climate conferences? Why do we have fossil fuel just being promised, great opportunities to drill by people like Trump who could get elected? I think when you see that there's very little progress going on, and at the same time, when people are making verbal commitments at international levels, but they're not carrying them out to a large extent. And then there's also, in my view, industries like nuclear power trying to jump back into the mix, even though they are not really green. There's a lot of greenwashing going on.
Yeah.
And we've been told just recently that the climate could go to 3.5 by the end of the century. And usually they're finding that the interaction of different problems that are going on, like loops, are causing things to happen much, much faster. They're always saying, we didn't expect this now, we expected this later. So I wouldn't reckon we have more than about 30 years to make massive changes. And I see that development is still going on in Sandy Mountain, Rings End, houses, apartments being built and so on.
Yeah.
And those they're going to be underwater, not in the long future, but in the near future. So
Yeah, well,
there's a huge amount of denial about the adults and the roots.
Yeah. Hold on. Yes.
Yeah, so first of all, I totally agree, and I think what we need to understand is that we can't make a deal with nature. That's one thing. We have to learn that we are part of nature, but we can't make a contract or a deal with it. And just to agree, third level is definitely too late to introduce people to climate change. It should come earlier, but as a dad of 2 girls, at what stage should you bring the bad news on what's happening, and how should you communicate that to your child, to a young child? At what stage?
Yes, well, of course.
And the other thing is, climate
but
change
if we
is
don't
big.
engage, then
Yeah,
we're
we don't
locking in
engage.
a
Climate
3.5 degree world, which will be disaster for all species on this planet. We've another question there at the back.
Yeah,
Hand up.
part question, part commentary to what I've been listening to. Something I personally think a lot about is how can we, so I'll start with an example of where the students are. The students are on TikTok, they're on YouTube, they're on Instagram. To them, a lot of young people have seen Greta Thunberg and Just Stop Oil become radicalised by the media. And the media cracked down, and particularly in the UK, where Just Stop Oil have actually ended up being a force for a lot of political and policing change, where the media starts going, okay, that's too left-wing or that's too controversial, so we stop talking about it, we stop pushing it out. So they're coming back to individuals in alternative media, social media, and they're listening to those sources there. They're getting engaged there. COVID definitely, they're disenfranchised, they don't know where to be in person anymore. They've lost connections with friends. I've seen people who've gone through an entire pandemic, their entire degree online. They never made those connections in college. And then they're coming back and their parents are like, well, I'm not seeing that on the news. So then my question is, when it becomes political, we stop talking about it in maybe more traditional media more. How in community TV, when we look at those standards, we look at those ethics, and make sure that we're sharing that conversation enough.
That's a good question. Could I put that to all 3 here now?
Well, I think I should take, because I know I saw Olivia put her hand up. Is there a question that before we conclude here, Olivia, did you want to put a question?
I just wanted to make a comment about the film, so I can either ask or I can make it quickly now.
Okay, make it very quickly,
I
because
just wanted to say that I think we have a whole conference about young people, and it's very hard to to sit in front of them and put up the 1987 Brundtland definition of sustainable development and say it's about meeting the needs of the present, without compromising the needs of the future. Because I was in this room saying this last week, and they're looking at me thinking, but who looked after our needs? We are the future. And they're looking at, they know that their parents and even their grandparents have experienced maybe stuff that we're now telling them that they can't really do, like travel the world and do all of these things. That's kind of hard for them to kind of come to terms with. So I have a lot of sympathy for them. And I can understand why sometimes they just want to put their head in the sand. But just in terms of very young kids who are not going to, things are going to need to be sorted way before young kids are in power. And I think for those children, this film is fabulous, because because I think it just connects them with nature, with biodiversity, and maybe would reduce a little bit of anxiety. You know, if you're going to go into a school and tell them a little bit about climate and what's going on, and then show them this, it really shows them like that what can be done, something that they can feel a little bit empowered about.
Sure.
So I love it, and I hope that kids all around the country get to see the film.
Absolutely.
Duncan, can I say, maybe on that very optimistic note, I know we have a fantastic panel to come up now, and we're a little bit behind time, but it's great the way a film can spark conversation, and again, that's Frances was the one who kind of was the motivator herself, and Victoria were the people who were behind the film. And it's great because now we're going to do more films. We're going to do one on the Tolka, going to do one on Slaney, going to do one on the Nanny and the Boyne, and we're going to show them in various schools around the country, you know.
That's great.
And in community centres as well. But so maybe I'm very conscious, Brian, I know we have to move on to the next panel, but we have a fantastic panel, and I have to say a mea culpa here, because Olivia Freeman, I'm very grateful indeed to TU Dublin for all their work on sustainability. Kevin, thank you for the tour earlier on. But Olivia Freeman is that expert on sustainability, and has been someone who has pushed it here in this university. I know that from my brother, and she's going to chair the next session. So maybe I'll ask the panelists for the next session to come forward. We have Kieran O'Carroll from Screen Ireland, Dr. Pat Brereton, Trish